John Doe, alcoholic.
Now, I am a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis in Indiana. I am a member of the Indianapolis group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I am an alcoholic. I was ordained to the Catholic priesthood in 1929, and I believe that at that time I was as sincere in my vocation as any priest that was ever ordained. However, in the back of my mind at that time was a very definite fear, and that fear was that I might become an alcoholic. And the reason for that fear was that my dad had been an alcoholic. I had not known him very well in life. He died when I was only 4.5 years old. But I'd heard the family talk, and I was raised with the conviction that the worst possible person in the world was an alcoholic, and I didn't want to be one. So on the occasion of my ordination, I made a decision. I made a decision that I would not partake of intoxicating beverages for a period of 1 year. Now, why I only said 1 year, I'll never know. I suppose it was the beginning of my rationalizing mind that always liked to keep a door open for future reference. But anyhow, I made such a decision. Well, now it so happened, after the first year in the priesthood, that the Bishop of Indianapolis sent me to New York City to postgraduate in the School of Education at Fordham University. That was during the lush days of Prohibition. And if any of you happen to have been in New York at that time, you would remember that every few days someone deposited a little pamphlet upon your doorstep. And in that little pamphlet were listed all the various types of liquors and liqueurs and rums and wines and champagnes and what have you. Call such and such a number, we deliver within 1 hour, which they did. Everybody drank in New York at that time, both socially and anti-socially. And so I rationalized to myself, I thought, well, now this is a wonderful opportunity for me to find out whether I am an alcoholic. So on occasion, I accepted my first highball. Oh, it didn't seem to affect me in any untoward manner at the time. But you know, I can look back now, having had the opportunity to analyze the circumstances much more clearly in these past few years. And I can see from that very first partaking of alcoholic beverages to any extent that there were very definite and very positive, although very slight, very definite and very positive changes in my attitudes. In my attitude toward God, toward my fellow man, toward my neighbor, toward myself. I think my case was very average. There was no evidence of increase in the beginning, and I came back to Indiana, and I was appointed to teach in high school. Now, that was still during the days of Prohibition. And in Indiana, we didn't have little pamphlets coming up to the doorsteps every few days. We had to drive down to a little town in the southern part of the state, Jasper, and buy it at $5 a gallon. And then go to Sears and Roebuck and get a charred cake for $2.98, put that on your radio for 90 days, and you had pretty good liquor. If you couldn't wait 90, 60, didn't do too bad a job. Well, it seems after a few years that the bishop found out that I was drinking much too much for my own good. And he asked me to go to a sanitarium in St. Louis, Missouri. Well, I went to this sanitarium, and there I had my first experience with the psychiatrist. Now, I do not want to decry psychiatry nor psychiatrists. I very definitely feel that we have a great need for good psychiatrists in this world. But anyhow, this individual, he happened to be a very pompous gentleman. I've always been afraid of running into him in some of the groups along the way. And he had me to sit down, and he asked me a lot of questions. And I gave him a lot of answers. Some true, mostly false. And then the question, Father, how much do you drink? And my answer, not much at all. Beer once in a while, but it doesn't bother me. Well, he didn't want to make of that. He leaned back and he scratched his head. He said, well, I don't know, Father. He said, you've told me a lot of other things here now for several hours. Now you say you don't drink. He said, I believe you're a hopeless neurotic. He said, what's your bishop's name? I'll call him and tell him so. Well, that frightened me. And I got to the phone before he did. And I called the bishop and called him long distance and told him I was feeling fine again. I'm going to go right back to work. Well, he in his very fatherly way told me to take the train back to New York City, to re-enter Fordham, and to remain there for a master's degree. I went back to New York, and for a period of 10 months, I did not drink. I was afraid to. However, at the end of 10 months, the first week in April, I received my master's degree, and the second week, someone offered me a drink on occasion, and I took it. Again, the increase was not noticeable. I came back again to Indiana. I was appointed as assistant pastor in several parishes, and then I received my first appointment as pastor. I was appointed as pastor of the little Crossroads Church of Snake Run, Indiana, which they did. As a matter of fact, I was only pastor there for about 16 months when the bishop found out that I was drinking much too much for my own good or anybody else's as far as that goes, and he sent me a letter. And it wasn't too nice a letter either, because in this letter he told me that he was hereby relieving me of my pastoral appointment and directing that I should return to Indianapolis to be assistant pastor again. Of course, he gave us the reason that he wanted me to be near him, but I never did believe that one. And he also, in this letter, asked me first to go to Sacred Heart Sanitarium in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Well, I went to this sanitarium, and there again I met a psychiatrist. And he again asked me a lot of questions, and I again gave him a lot of answers, mostly not true. Then the inevitable question, Father, how much do you drink? And the inevitable alcoholic answer, not much at all. Beer once in a while, but it doesn't bother me. Sometimes 2 beers. Well, you know, that always seemed to stump me. Because he leaned back, too, and scratched his head. He said, well, I don't know, Father. He said, from all the things that you've told me, we've been sitting here discussing your problems for several hours. And he said, now you say you don't drink? He said, I believe you're a manic depressive. Well, I didn't know what that meant at the time. I remember when I got to my room, I looked it up in the dictionary, and I closed it in a hurry. Because it means, well, it means you're a little bit crazy. But I stayed at this sanitarium for a period of 7 weeks. And then I became restless to go home, and I told the doctor so. And I said, furthermore, doctor, I can go home, and I can do at home everything that I'm doing here. Well, he gave me an answer, which at the time didn't mean very much. But again, since I have had opportunity to analyze his answer much more clearly in these past few years, I can see the wisdom of his answer. And his answer was, Father, you can, but you won't, which I didn't. I did go back to Indianapolis, but I set about immediately to convince the bishop that he was wrong, that he had made a mistake, that he had misjudged me. I used every opportunity to bring this to his attention, only as an alcoholic can. For 10 months, again, I did not drink. I was afraid to. You know, it seems that fear lasted about 10 months in the upper parts of my consciousness, and then fear left, and so did sobriety. So at the end of 10 months, someone offered me a drink on occasion, and I took it. This time, the increase was very rapid. And right in the middle of it, I get another letter from the bishop. Oh, this was a nice letter. In this letter, he told me that he had been convinced that he had made a mistake. He felt he had misjudged me. And so in order to make up for it, he was hereby appointing me as pastor of a city parish in Indianapolis. Well, of course, I was very much elated by that so-called victory, and that wasn't good at all. I remember the appointment took effect at the beginning of Lent. And I suppose as sort of a subconscious struggle for a bit of honesty, I made up my mind that I wouldn't drink anymore during Lent. I got by 10 days. In fact, I never got by any longer after that. As a matter of fact, I was only pastor at this parish for 12 months. When Bishop found out beyond any shadow of a doubt that he had been right in the first place. And then he sent me a letter that was a honey. And in this letter, he told me to go to a sanitarium in the northern wilds of Wisconsin until further notice. Now, that might have meant 6 months, 6 years, or life, for all I knew. But I, as a priest, and he as my superior and bishop, I had to go. But you know, I had a very close friend to take with me, a friend of long years standing, and that was my rationalizing mind. We sat down, we figured it all out. Thought, well, I have a car, I can drive up there, and every day I can drive around the countryside and relax. I called a personal friend of mine in Indianapolis and ordered a case of liquor. I remember it fitted in my Gladstone bag perfectly, 6 on each side. Of course, you had to take out some clothes, but that wasn't too important. So I rationalized to myself, I thought, well, now I'll have a nice long rest and relaxation out of this. That's been my trouble. I've been working too hard. So off I set to the sanitarium. Well, when I got there, I found out they didn't allow those things there. As a matter of fact, the bishop had sent word that I should dispose of my car immediately, and that I should never again in the future drive nor own a car without his written permission. Well, of course, everything being taken away from me so suddenly, you know, I was a bit upset and nervous and jittery and sick, and I called for a doctor, and I got a psychiatrist. And he asked me a lot of questions, too. And then, Father, how much do you drink? I said, why, doctor, I haven't had a drink since I've been here. 48 hours. Well, he didn't know what to make of it either. He scratched his head and he says, well, I don't know, Father. He said, now, all the other problems we've been discussing between us here, and you say you don't drink. He said, I believe you're a schizophrenic. And he said, I think the shock treatments will help you. Well, I didn't know what either the shock treatments or schizophrenia was. I thought the shock treatments were some kind of massages, you know, to relax one. Well, anyhow, the next afternoon, a limousine came up to the sanitarium and called for me by name. And I got into the limousine. We drove out into the country. And as we were driving along, I was admiring the beautiful architecture of the various estates as we passed them. However, soon we came to a very large estate. And as I was admiring the buildings, we came to the front entrance. And there over the gate was inscribed in letters of iron, the Wisconsin State Hospital for the Insane. And in we went. Well, I thought this is the end of the road. But I was there, so I took the shock treatments. 8 of them. Oh, they might have quieted my mental upset a bit, I suppose, my nerves somewhat, I don't know. But they had no effect on my alcoholic problem. In fact, I was at this sanitarium for 11 months, and certainly during that time, I had readjusted again to fidelity to prayer and meditation and the various other obligations that we have as priests. So when the bishop sent word that I should report to his office in Indianapolis, I again was very much elated, and that wasn't good. I don't know what I expected. Perhaps I thought he was going to give me a nice big parish for having been up there 11 months. I don't know. But I do remember that I came back to Indianapolis in a very expectant frame of mind, and that was not good. And I went to his office, and I sat down, and he began. He said, well, Ralph, he always called me by my first name. We used to be good friends in the old days. He said, I'll give you another chance. He said, you can go up such and such a parish and live there for a while. He said, I don't know whether the pastor will take you or not. He said, I haven't talked to him as yet. But he says, anyhow, he says, I don't think there's a chance in the world for you. He says, I am convinced you're absolutely hopeless. Well, there I sat. A hopeless, neurotic, manic, depressive, schizophrenic. With the bottom of the world dropped out from under me. Many of you know what that meant. An influx again of fears and phobias and resentments and self-pity and all those things that an alcoholic, and only an alcoholic, can know so deeply and so well. They had never been eliminated from my personality in the past, and now they came to the front in all their vengeance. I was a very much frightened individual when I went to this rectory. I was very much dejected. I was afraid to leave the house. I thought everyone would be pointing their finger of scorn at me, because after all, I had been pastor of a parish next door just 11 months before. However, in spite of all these circumstances, just 7 days after I had returned to Indianapolis from this sanitarium, a friend of mine came to town, called me on the phone, and wanted to know if I'd like to take a ride. He knew I didn't have a car. Those things get around, you know. So I said I would, and he came by the rectory, and I got into the car, and he said, how about a little drink? Well, I thought one little drink won't hurt me. So I took a drink.